Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this webcast on addressing race, racism, and social justice in world language classrooms. I'm Tony Jackson. I'm Vice President for Education and Director of the Center for Global Education at Asia Society. And this webcast is one of a series of webcasts called Teaching Truth to Power. Within Asia Society's mission to create bridges of understanding between the people of Asia, the United States, and the world, our focus within the Center for Global Education is to partner with institutions in the world to educate all students for employability and citizenship in a global era. And we do that through scholarship, through developing resources for educators and policymakers, by bringing together Asian and American and global stakeholders to exchange knowledge and perspectives, and as in this webcast, by amplifying the voices of educators who are helping students to navigate cultural boundaries. In this instance, helping students develop one of the strongest deterrents to racism and racist thinking that anyone who can really imagine, and that is being able to speak the language of others who are very different from yourselves. Through all of our work to promote global learning at the Center for Global Education, what we have is a relentless commitment to equity. And specifically for nearly 2 decades, the Center for Global Education has advanced education for global competence as an approach to educational reform and as a way to develop in youth a mindset that abhors and actively works against racism and inequality. Among other things, education for global competence requires engaging children in experiences designed to develop empathy and to counter the kind of innate psychological mechanism of othering that is at the heart of prejudice. Learning someone else's language does just that. And through the dialogue that learning someone else's language allows, it enables us to understand others' cultures and to see each other as authentic human beings with some of the same kinds of hopes and fears and dreams that we have. So not an other, but a brother or a sister in the broad human family. In today's webcast, we'll have a chance to expand our own global competence by hearing from teachers as they address their own experiences as they relate to racism and what they do to help their students understand and overcome racialized prejudice. To take us forward, I'm extremely pleased to turn the proceedings over to Dr. Neelam Chowdhury, who is the Executive Director of Global Learning at Asia Society. Over to you, Neelam.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome, everybody. And as Tony has already stated, we have a very exciting program for you today. So the research is clear. Students who speak another language do better academically and think more creatively, have access to a wider variety of jobs, and can more fully engage and participate in other cultures or converse with people from diverse backgrounds. However, the American Councils for International Education survey, which sought state-by-state data on enrollment in world language courses, estimates that only 10.6 million K-12 students in the United States are studying a world language or American Sign Language. That's only 1 out of every 5 students, or approximately 20% of the student population in the United States. It is often stated that the study of a world language can influence the attitudes and behavior of learners. One of the goals of language teaching is to challenge stereotypes and encourage learners to engage with the cultural forms that can be accessed through a new language. Through learning a language, it is hoped that learners will draw on their experiences to reflect critically on their own cultures and identities. We hope to unpack some of these issues in our panel discussion today. And I am now pleased to introduce our esteemed group of educators who have spent much of their careers focused on integrating world languages into US schools. So first we have Lynn Tao. She was born and raised in China. She received an associate's degree from the Sichuan International Studies University and later earned a master's in business administration from the University of Liverpool in the UK. The United States is the 3rd continent she has resided in within the last 10 years. She has lived in Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, and Ghana before moving to the United States with her family in 2014. 2 interesting facts about Lynn are that she is an avid runner and that she has summited Mount Kilimanjaro back in 2013. We also have Kathleen Wong. She is a lead founder of the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School in Western Massachusetts. Her school is a K-12 public charter school with a diverse student body from over 30 rural, suburban, and urban communities. All students are required to take Chinese, and the high school is an international baccalaureate diploma program. This is Kathleen's 14th year as principal, and she has almost 20 years of experience in education. She enjoys nature, hiking, and learning new things. Haiyun Liu has been a Chinese teacher since 1993. She is passionate about employing comprehensible input-based instruction in her classes and implementing mindfulness in education. She is a mindfulness coach for her school's track and field team and the volleyball team. She has been training and coaching language teachers throughout North America and Asia. Haiyun is a co-founder of the Comprehensible Midwest Conference, Learn Together Academy, and also co-founded Ignite Chinese. She is a blogger and writer. She has written 16 storybooks in Chinese. When Haiyun is not teaching, she likes to hike, meditate, drink tea with friends, enjoy a good meal with family, and play games with her son. Finally, we have Jennifer Wu Pope. She is currently a Chinese teacher in the Half Hollow Hills School District in New York. She has about 15 years of experience in the K-12 classroom, having also taught French and English as a new language. She has worked with pre-service teachers at the university level and has presented at national and state world language conferences. She is passionate about building students' cross-cultural understanding and global competence skills. Last year, she participated in the Fulbright Distinguished Awards in a teaching semester research program in Singapore. Her future goals are to write a children's book and to climb all 35 peaks in the Catskills Mountains. And finally, last but not least, I am pleased to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Cleopatra Wise. Cleopatra is the director for Asia Society's Center for Global Education, China Learning Initiatives. She is responsible for managing the CLI group and executing programs that promote Chinese language learning among young people in the United States. Before joining Asia Society, Cleopatra lived and worked in China for 8 years. Cleopatra holds a BA in International Relations from the University of Southern California. She also earned an MBA from the Guanghua School of Management at Peking University. Cleopatra is probably one of the most dynamic people I know. She is a Florida native, and she speaks fluent Mandarin Chinese and West African Creole. So with that, Cleo, I will leave it to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Neelam, for that wonderful introduction. And I would like to say, first of all, thank you all for coming and joining this webinar. And thank you to all of the panelists. I'm so excited to have a dynamic conversation around addressing racism, race, and equity issues in the world language classroom. So I'm just going to kick it off with a very easy question first, which is what influenced your decision to become a teacher of world language, and how long have you been teaching? And I'll have Liu Haiyun start it off.
Thank you, Cleo. Thank you, Neelam, for the invitation. First of all, I wanted to express my gratitude for you organize this webinar. It's much needed. It's very timely. Speaking of what influenced me to become a teacher, I wanted to become a teacher since I was 7 years old. My first grade teacher inspired me. That was just like since I was a young child, I had this seed in my heart. I want to become a teacher. I graduated from Henan Normal University, taught in an elementary school in China for a few years, then immigrated here. So it was quite just a natural progression to become a language teacher, continue to teach because I was teaching Chinese back in China. I have been a teacher for more than 20 years, teaching Chinese as a second language for 16 years at my current school. This is my 14th year working at the University School of Milwaukee. Very glad to be here.
Thank you, Haiyun. And I'll also pass this question on to Kathy, who is not a teacher, but a founder. So could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to found an immersion school and what inspired you to become an educator?
So thank you for having me here. I agree with Haiyun. This is an extremely timely topic, and I hope it's not the first and only one. We have to continue these dialogues. I think I was influenced in part. I grew up in this country, but my parents were immigrants. and spoke Chinese as a second language. My dad was a teacher for almost 40 years. So education was always an important part of our household. Contrary to what some might think, looking at my face, they weren't like tiger parents. They were artists, actually, and never pressured us as children. But I got into this because we were, as one of the founders, if you look at language education in Massachusetts and even broader in the United States, very few young children in elementary school have access to it. And that really didn't make sense given where the world is and has been. A lot of people will talk about, the future. The future is global. Well, we're in the future, and it takes effort of all of us to try to think broadly in terms of giving young students. So our school starts in kindergarten, but giving them that experience to go to school with each other. So the design of our school was very much born out of some of my own experiences growing up and not really having language education as a young kid, but looking also at other countries. And my parents spoke other languages because they had to, or they grew up with it. And they came from modest backgrounds. So I think the number one reason is really we have it as our responsibility to make society better. I am a child of the 1960s. So the talk about civil rights, inequity, the data around how schools are structured nationally is pretty obvious that change needs to happen. So that's sort of my short story.
Thank you, Kathy. I think all of us on this call have had our personal interactions in terms of race and dealing with racism. And so before we start to talk about how this is affecting all of you in the classroom and what you're doing in the classroom, I did want to touch on a little bit about your personal background. And so the next question really is around, as a person of Chinese heritage, everyone on this call is a person of Chinese heritage except for myself. What have you experienced in terms of racism or injustice in either your personal or professional life? And so I'll have Jennifer Wu start this conversation.
Hi, and thank you also for having me on this panel. It's an honor to be among such experienced educators. For me, personally, the most recent experience actually was surrounding the COVID pandemic. I had been in Singapore on my research program. And so there I was researching global competence. And so how they approach it is looking at appreciation of diversity. They look at empathy building. They look at racial harmony, et cetera. So while I was there, the coronavirus broke out. And so I got to see how they responded to it, not just with safety measures, but also the social responses, as well as the educational responses. I saw them do perspective taking, just so that learning from their experience with SARS, they would not have certain groups be stigmatized. So they really focused on preserving social unity. So because of the pandemic, when it reached global proportions, the program was canceled. I came back home to New York when it was the epicenter of the pandemic, of the outbreak here. And so here I experienced microaggressions for being a Chinese speaker, for just being in the community, just speaking Chinese with a family member out in public, experiencing responses from people, or even just returning back to school and being treated differently than I had when before I left. So this was my most recent experience.
Yeah, you definitely bring up something that I think a lot of Chinese Americans or people of Chinese heritage have talked about during the course of the pandemic, which is racism directly correlated with the pandemic and COVID-19. Can anyone else speak to that, whether it be your personal or your professional life?
I can sort of share some experiences. I think COVID-19 certainly is the most recent sort of highlight on Asia. What it, for me, however, having grown up here with immigrant parents, there are things in daily life that are, I would say, you get used to it in some sense, like people saying, "Oh, you speak English really well," or "Oh, you speak English," or "Where are you from?" or not being able to pronounce your name, or things like that. So there, to me, racism is, it can be a collection of assumptions about who you are, right? And so, you know, one thing being Asian, there's some negative stereotypes, but there's also this, you know, the people have probably heard the term model minority. Well, that also can lead to you know, detrimental feelings about identity and things too, if you don't live up to that, or blah, blah, blah. It also gets into pitting races against each other, and all kinds of discussions that get much, much deeper. But I think COVID in itself surfaces stuff, not just for Asians, but for other races, like Blacks or Latinos or people of color or women or transgender. It surfaced a lot of things that were already there. And I think that is what people really need to continue these dialogues. And in terms of language education, you know, one of the goals of our school is through language and through serving a region of service that is very large. We want kids of many different backgrounds to come together in school. And, you know, we support 39 communities in the rural, suburban, and urban county. The urban county has two of the poorest cities in Western Mass. The rural county is actually the poorest county in Massachusetts. And this is socioeconomic data. I don't mean to say that the people have deficits. I think the sad part with our education system, and it's systemic, is the way education is organized and funded. You know, in Massachusetts, it's through property tax, and you know, there's historic reasons. But I think these events like COVID or you know, horrific things we see in the media are highlight points, but it's like when you see the tip of the iceberg. And depending on how they're broadcast, or depending on how they're interpreted, opens up the dialogue. And it opens up scars, which are historic, which can also prevent people from moving forward. And so, you know, I very much think language education is important. I very much think that having students, having children go to school with children from different backgrounds is absolutely essential, because then you do get, you know, what Dr. Jackson was talking about, you get authentic experiences. We wanted to start with kindergarten because 5-year-olds they just play. They don't judge someone as harshly as adults may judge them, or some adults, it's very implicit and very subconscious, right? It's more at least out front. I mean, children they're learning their social skills, they're learning their about other people. So those are things that I think are really both policy issues and systemic things that will change how people view each other. So
to piggyback on that, Kathy, I think also probably piggyback on both Kathy and Jennifer's comment about the racism in daily life. A lot of times I think it's not people intentionally to be racism. And a lot of times it's probably ignorance. And my example I can raise here is actually allow me to use that as a teaching moment. One of my African-American student, she was a grade 9 student, so it's just a freshman. And in the class, and then she just raised her hand. It's like, Miss Tao, can I ask you a question? Has nothing to do with what you are teaching. I'm like, okay, what is it? And she says, well, you know, you people at the nail salon, they were so good at their job. Where did they learn that? So she's only a freshman. I don't think she intentionally want to categorize Chinese people as nail salon people, but she just expressed that in a way that for some other people who is more sensitive, they might consider that to be racist or to be racism. So I actually used that as a teaching moment. This is the time we can talk about culture. We can talk about what Chinese people do in the other areas in this country, contribute to the society and so on. So just piggyback on that, I just thought what Kathy and Jennifer has talked there is very important to start young when they still don't have their mindset yet, and set in a way that stereotype people around them, and the microaggression that Jennifer has mentioned. And I think it's very important to start that dialogue at very young age. That's what I want to.
Yeah, I think both what all of you are touching on in terms of the equity issues in the United States, and also, you know, your personal issues addressing race have been very much highlighted through the course of 2020 through COVID, but also through the murder of George Floyd. I think for all of us watching the video of George Floyd being murdered by the police was a kind of shock to the system in the United States. And that video, you know, I have a lot of friends in China, and that video was widely shared across the world. And a lot of my Chinese friends had a lot of questions for me, you know, in terms of how could this happen, and what are people doing to address it, and in general, how, you know, America is responding. And so for the first time, at least in my lifetime, I think it's been an opportunity for us to reflect on race and to reflect on racism in the United States, and have real conversations on every single level. And education is definitely one of those levels. So I would love to get a sense of, you know, what have you seen as the biggest challenges for your students to deal with equity and to deal with social injustice? And I'll first direct this question to Kathy.
I'd be glad to answer that. In fact, right before this webinar, I had a meeting with, I'm a club advisor to one of our high school clubs. It's the Black Student Union. And so our students have discussions about race and equity every week in the club. And we hold events and town meetings and things like that. So I actually posed this question to them, and they are high school students. The first thing they said was gaining knowledge. And I think if you ask them more deeply, I said, well, are you talking about history? Are you talking about knowledge about contemporary events? Are you talking about, you know, news and how to analyze it? And they just said something to the effect of understanding how we got where we are. And, you know, it may sound, I think, you know, and we teach all kinds of history. We try very much to have kids engaged in extracurricular activities that talk about race and ethnicity, or supporting inclusive environments. We have an entire social emotional curriculum that spans K through 12. And we've also tried to create safe spaces. So we have something called a peace room where kids can go to, not only they can just go themselves to talk if they have a free period during the day. And we've created this all virtual now because we're operating virtually now. But I think it's a really important question to say, how did we get here? But they always say, why can't we fix it faster? And, you know, teenagers and young people ask these really profound questions that sound like obvious questions. But now, you know, again, I grew up in the 1960s. What my students tell me is, okay, it's been decades. How come nothing's changed, really? And I think that is the question for us as adults. And I also posed it to them saying, you're young adults. What do we have to do? Because it is beyond heartbreaking to see tragedy live streamed in some cases around the world. And so collectively, I'm a big sort of collectively collaborative type, how do you build this together? And I also try to say to the students and myself, we share responsibility. We should not finger point. And it sounds cliche, but it's really, really important for people to have discussions like this today and just be honest about it and say, we have to go forward. We have to do something. So I believe very much in the power of small teams to do things. I believe very much in the power of idealism. And I think, you know, the panel here, I'm very interested in hearing their perspective also, because it's not only people who grow up here. I think the United States has an amazingly rich heritage of immigration and people who come to study here, or our own students going to other countries, or even visiting another state or city is really important. But getting perspective, I think, is one of the key pieces that I've learned from my students, and also in terms of how we can move this forward.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'll address that same question to the rest of the panel.
I'd like to add to what Kathy had said. So I completely agree that the kids are looking at us as adults for some kind of direction, and I think some kind of hope as well. And what Colleen had said before, using those learning opportunities, whether it's impromptu in the classroom, or even just as world language teachers, we have this potential, this opportunity to have these types of discussions on culture and our views on identity and on ethnicity, et cetera. And so allow students to analyze not just their own identities as they're developing them, but also help guide them towards appreciating the diversity of the culture that they're learning. So whether it's, let's say, Chinese culture, just Chinese culture is so diverse. Are we going to only focus on Han culture, or are we going to also incorporate ethnic minority groups too? So I think giving students that bigger picture of what the real world looks like, so that they're able to have more cross-cultural skills to eventually interact with maybe these different groups in Chinese-speaking countries, or even just in diverse teams, maybe in their jobs.
That's definitely great.
For me, I think, sorry,
Go ahead.
Irene, go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay, so to echo back what Kathy and Jennifer said, I think there's 3 areas that particularly are challenging for students. One, our teacher lack proper trainings to undo unconscious bias within us, which is created by systematic racism, you know, media influence, culture, history, how curriculum's being taught in school. We don't have the proper tool. Even we have the awareness, we can't just walk into classrooms to have a conversation. So the conversation needed to be held in a very safe, supportive way, so people can express their concerns, give their voice. Teachers need training to be there to truly to support the students, and they hold a space for all students to raise their voice. Without to be able to create that place, we might only hear the voice we wanted to hear, but we are not hearing the voice which is also there. Without hearing the voice which make us uncomfortable, we can't work through the issues. So number two, I think students lack a proper platform to learn to grow. Like Kathy said, they wanted to know how did we get here, and how do we undo that, and where can I go? Who can I go to? What is the resources out there? How could I undo this? I think that's the second challenge. Third challenge, I really think, is school needs more outreach program to bring parents on board on the same page. So we, if a school curriculum is completely separate from what they hear from their family, then we're not really reaching this group of children, and then with diverse families. So that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Hayun. And
And
Taolin?
for me, I think it's probably from a personal level, I think that you could only do that much to change the whole picture. We all can contribute to that, but we could only do that much to change the whole picture. And with my experience, as I have talked about my school background before, our school is a heritagely Black school. It was founded in 1918, but so historically, we did not have any other ethnicity group to join to attend our school until 1973. So by this point, we probably have about 40% African-American students, about 40 Caucasian students, and about 20 others. And so I have about 60% students. They are African-American. And I do not just teach Chinese. I also have ACT prep program to prepare them, participate in the entrance exam test to college and so on. And what I have observed in my classroom is a lot of times the students have a victim mentality. They view themselves as victim of the society. In a way, I absolutely agree with them that they have been victimized as the minority in the society for way too long. And as Kathy has mentioned, why it has not changed over the decades. That is a question we do need to ask. But I want to convey my message to my students. If you keep yourself in that victim mentality, you will constantly think the society is not fair to you, which yes, it is. I'm not suggesting them to stop fighting. What I always suggest them to do is you have to get yourself out of that mindset. You have to start from the individual level. Do something, change your own situation, and reach that to the community, and becoming a circle, a rippling circle. And then you will see the change to the society level. So that's my approach. That's my view on this one. I think especially what I have observed, like I said, that the African-American society, the students, they view them as victims for way too long. I think they need to jump out of that loophole.
I love your statement in terms of, making sure to encourage your students to move past a victim kind of mentality and change their own individual circumstances. And one of the things that I always like to convey to our partner schools, particularly that are in rural and low income neighborhoods and communities, is that Chinese is definitely a way in which those students can achieve. So I would love to ask a question, which I know I definitely did not send to any of you, but how do you see Chinese as being influential to deal with equity issues for lower income and students in rural communities? Okay, Kathy.
Well, I love this topic. It goes to defining a student's identity. I think if I go back to one definition that I sort of allude to, that racism is people making assumptions about you based on your race. We're trying, and what we've seen, what the effect of learning Chinese, because every student takes Chinese, and the majority of our students have zero Chinese heritage or language background. It's really shown them that they can redefine their identity. And in most cases, it's a really positive thing because, for example, a student who doesn't look Chinese may start speaking Chinese, you know, outside of our school or in whatever situation they may find themselves in, or they may just tell somebody they speak Chinese, and they witness the reaction of the person, and they're surprised that the other person is surprised. So in some sense, they're seeing almost an opposite effect of like, why would you think that's odd? Every kid in my school takes Chinese, right? So in their worldview, everybody takes Chinese, right? But when they step out of our school, the reaction is, I would have never expected that. And so they actually see a form of racism in that people assume that a person who doesn't have an Asian face cannot speak Chinese. And so for some of our students, what it's done is redefine their sense of who they are, because they were getting feedback from people saying, whoa, I never expected, you know, a kid, you know, a Latino kid to speak Chinese, right? Or I never expected, you know, a non-Asian student to speak Chinese. For some of our students, this is just mind-blowing, because I think there have been, for some of them, certainly the older ones who've had more sort of social messaging sort of like thrown at them, it's mind-blowing because they see themselves in a new light that they never may have thought society saw them in. And to me, that's an issue of the way society views you based on who you look like or who you're, you know, what you look like. That is daily judgmental racism or boxing you into a certain you know, profession or skill level or ability or things like that. So I see Chinese as being, in some sense, level setting and putting everybody almost on a similar level, because none of them had it when they entered. And we try to take data in terms of, you know, academic data clearly, but we also try to understand social emotional effects. Because if you give a kid a possibility and an opportunity that they may never have thought they could do, and then they do well at it, defying stereotypes or redefining their identity, that helps overall self-esteem and social emotional growth, which, you know, go hand in hand with what they then do post-secondary and what they can then dream about. And I think that's the beauty of education. So that's my answer.
That's nicely put. And Lu Haiyun?
Yes, I would like to add that because Chinese has a notorious reputation for being hard, it has been traditionally treated, or nowadays still be treated as an elite program. People without a lot of time, resources, dedication, and most people won't succeed. So what I really believe is nothing motivates like a success. How can we empower students, have them believe, trust, and it's in there, every single cell in the body, I can do this. That's really the main reason I'm so committed to comprehensive input-based instruction, because it gives every student a chance to succeed. So in terms of equity, can we make Chinese so accessible, comprehensible, compelling for every single kid in our classroom? So we do need, as a teacher, we got to start with us as well. Can we improve our teaching methodologies?
Yes, and so I'm going to transition to kind of the meat and potatoes of the conversation. I think oftentimes when we talk about race, when we talk about equity, we talk about it in very abstract terms. And so I really want to get down into the practical terms, as all of you are either a school leader like Kathy or a Chinese teacher actually teaching in the classroom. And so I wanted to get a sense of what are you doing in your classroom to address, social injustice and equity. So maybe I'll open it up to Jennifer first.
So there's multiple ways of addressing this. So going to first looking through the lens of critical pedagogy, for example, alluding to kind of what I was saying before, how we have, as world language teachers, kind of a responsibility to treat culture not as just a discrete set of facts, but it's actually, there's a socio-political dimension, right? So how we're forming the target culture in our students' minds is how they're going to perceive what they're learning, and ultimately the people groups that they're interacting with. So what I do in my class is I use a lot of imagery, right, for context. So I'll add a lot of diverse. So for example, if we're in the unit on like travel and countries and nationalities, they will not just see representations of Chinese people as just the Han, which is like the stereotypical view of Chinese people as the Han group, right? So I'll put in images also of like Chinese Muslims. There's Chinese, the Miao group or the Yi group, right? So that they see different clothing, different types of I guess the depth of what I guess what Chinese, right, means to be, but I don't just box it in. So I like to always give my students also the disclaimer that it's very difficult. We can't just set these boundaries and say, okay, if you are Chinese, you must like to drink tea. You must only like to drink tea. And that's not true. And that's not what we want to teach the kids. So I think it's important to design our lessons through that lens of critical pedagogy and critical consciousness. Another example is I give my students opportunities to do perspective taking. So where they, for example, in the transportation unit, they might not just learn about different modes of transportation. I teach novice level, novice, low intermediate level students. So they don't just learn different modes of transportation, but they look at, okay, if you're doing this mode of transportation, how might someone feel if, let's say they're taking up a seat and they're an elderly person, or if during COVID, I had them think about, okay, well, there are some news stories. How do you think these Asian passengers felt when they were, treated this way on the subway? And then also, there's just so many ways we can incorporate the opportunity for students to reflect about their own identity. So it could be their racial identity, it could be their ethnic identity, but because these things come about in our classrooms, we can't avoid them. We talk about them in our classes. I think we have that responsibility to really treat it in a way that is empowering for the students and gives them the opportunity to also grow as individuals, and also have the cross-cultural skills to bring forward for the future.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that explanation. How about Lu Haiyun?
Jennifer, that was great. You gave lots of example to talk about how to avoid presenting information from a single side story. That's my first point. Here's an example about a single side story, and also how to really be aware and conscious to catch our unconscious bias. My son took a Spanish class, and then he also has a tutor on Friday evening. It's a fabulous teacher. Absolutely in love with her. She's just fabulous. So last Friday, so she presented a little story. Two girls, and she's using honest, dishonest, so on and so forth. And this is for a group of Chinese children. And she dropped in a picture, gave her name Kathy, just happened to be Kathy, a white woman. She asked, is she honest or dishonest? The group of Chinese kids said, no, she's dishonest. And this teacher said, no, she is honest. And then she dropped in another picture, is an African-American girl. Is she honest, dishonest? And then the kids said honest. And then she said, no, she is dishonest. This is a fabulous teacher. Is she aware, conscious, doing, reinforce this stereotypical white is better than black? No, I don't think she's conscious of that. But this is why to fight against our unconscious bias, so not to reinforce this belief of white is better than black. If I didn't have the class, didn't take those talks, webinars, I wouldn't see that as a problem either. So that's the how we can uncheck our own unconscious bias to not presenting material reinforce a single-sided story. My second point would be offering a holistic curriculum that truly address equity, justice, injustice, anti-racism. For example, I have 3 examples here. One of my go-to resources I use in my class called That Dollar Street. It was founded by Ann Gosling from Sweden. She sent tons of photography, went in 50 different countries, visit 263 families. Basically, it's just like putting everyone, imagine everybody lives on one street based on their income level. The left is the poorest, the right is the richest. And when we break down people by their income level, it doesn't matter. What is your skin color? What's your race? What's your family, culture, country? The bathroom, if you only have a monthly income of $30, you're going to use the pit toilet outside. And once you reach this above monthly income, let's say 3,000, you're going to live in a comfortable house, have a refrigerator, have a bedroom called your own. So that helped to really break through the stereotype for, oh, these people in that country, in that race, they do this or that. That is pretty much my go-to resource. Bedroom, okay, sure. Let's look at the bedroom around the world. Which income level you want to see? You want to see someone's living room, utensil, toothbrush. When people below $200 monthly income, the whole family share one toothbrush, and they tie it on a tree, in a string on a tree. Whoever need to use it, they use it. It doesn't matter which continent that you live in. So that's number one. Human in New York. That's my secondary resources. I go to there quite a lot. So a few years ago, my first set of children book, actually Chinese curriculum in my kitten use cats, kitten theory. I purposely have a black cat in the story, and also it's parallel to the Western culture. Black cat is unlucky because it's black. So the students, some kids always catch on, Ms. Lu, why you write about racism in your story? Now after George Floyd, it was just like, duh, no brainer. Yes, we needed to talk about this in our curriculum. So lastly, what I want to say, what I do is being inclusive, not exclusive with our materials. So I came from a mainland, so I know a lot about mainland's custom tradition, even terminology. I don't know much about Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. I especially don't know about those Chinese-speaking regions, let's say in Malaysia. in those, they have a really strong Chinese program. So I have friends, we have a network online. So just like today, we were talking about the house chores. I learned from my Taiwanese friend teachers. Instead of 家务活, they call 家事. It's like 地道, 道地, all those terms. So I do one way in, okay, mainland say this, but here is what's in Taiwan. In our curriculum, we can't just only talk about, okay, I'm from mainland, I'm going to talk everything about mainland. What about Angel Island? What about Railroad? What about Gold Rush? And I didn't know during the same Gold Rush period, there's lots of people come to the US. There's tons of people went to Africa. I was like, oh my God, I need to find a resource to teach that. That means we're being inclusive and not exclusive. So thank you.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I think you highlighted some great resources. So we'll make sure to put that in the those resources in the description as well. Tao Lin?
Well, for me, I think I teach high schoolers, so they are young adults, and their mindset is slightly different from middle schoolers or elementary kids. They are more mature. They view the world as almost an adult point of view. And for me, and I think a lot of times when I'm in class, I actually veer away from just Chinese language. I think a very important thing I do is I have a discussion with the students head on, hard discussions, just based on the current affairs. For example, some of those events happen so close to home. I use those moments all the time. And yes, we discuss them in English, because in this case, I think Chinese is not enough to express what they actually have. And then example being in 2017, Terence Crutcher, and he was shot by a policewoman in Tulsa. And he actually have nephews and nieces attend my school. And so that was a very hated moment in the whole community, not just my school, the whole Tulsa community. And I used that as a teaching moment. We just had for a few days, my different levels, we just talk about how do you view these events? What is your insight on this particular occurrence? It's a tragedy, not even an incident. And then another example would be the Tulsa Black Wall Street Massacre. And I don't know any of you have heard of that. That is probably the biggest racial violence of American history. Occurred in 1921 and May 31st and June 1st. And Tulsa Black Wall Street at the time is the most wealthiest community in the whole America. And the white residents basically used an incident has happened and basically erased the whole community. About 10,000 Black people has left homeless. And then so that has somehow, nobody talk about it. Nobody talked about until in 20 years ago, people start to raise the issue. And then so now it has been incorporated into the Oklahoma curriculum. So those are the moments, they are so close to home. I use those moments to have a head-on hard discussion with my students. No, like I said, we don't use Chinese to discuss those, but I think it's important. Standing from a Chinese teacher point of view, from a totally different culture, did not have much of understanding about the racial injustice in America, how I facilitate this discussion, and how do they see me as kind of an outsider looking into the issue? How would that affect their thoughts, their insights? I think it's also very important.
Thank you, Talon, especially relating it back to very local events and local instances of injustice is very important. And Kathy, I would love to hear your perspective from the school leadership point of view.
First, I think curriculum, instruction, we've heard about that, staffing, training for staff. To me, those are foundational core pieces to address topics of racism. But what I wanted to sort of highlight and what we're trying to do is direct individual participation of the students. And this gets into their own behavior in class towards each other. We have restorative practices and we start social emotional lessons early on in all classes, not only our Chinese classes. And obviously students come from different backgrounds and it involves, their parents and families. But at the individual student level, if we see a student or hear a student saying something that could be racist, we want to address that right away and stop class, potentially. Have a discussion in a safe environment. So we'll use restorative circles, we set up a peace room, we have counselors, we provide training to our staff. But we want to have, certainly when they're younger, it may be just ignorance, so to speak, but I think by the time they get to, upper elementary and middle school, we don't want to think that ignorance is a valid reason, if that makes sense, because it's also our responsibility as educators to reduce that ignorance. So the steps we take follow a process that is very much, first, we want to make the student feel safe, but we also want people to acknowledge why a racist comment, for example, is a problem. And then with using restorative practices, the participation of maybe the student who was hurt or another student, or like a peer trained student or a high school student. And we have a K-12 program, so we try to have older kids come in. So for example, if it was a statement about an African-American student, we may want to bring in an older peer, like high school student, and come into elementary school or come into middle school to have a dialogue that's, again, safe. But also the goal of that is to have somebody of that race in a moderated environment have an honest discussion so that we can build empathy. And I think that individual participation, and it can be done in any classroom, it does take some time, but we find that the goal is by teaching the kids the skills to have the dialogue and also be able to relate to someone. Like, it's easy to say something hurtful if you don't know the person, right? We see that in social media. Or it's easy to assume things about people, about their race, if you never actually have a conversation with a person of that race. It's abstract. We're trying to minimize that abstraction and just have the kids on a human to human, person to person level be respectful and understand that we need to treat each other fundamentally, each as human beings. We all have, unique characteristics, but fundamentally, it's a very basic thing. And in some sense, we want to teach them that this is just common sense, right? And I think common sense isn't always common, but we can hope and dream and try to do little steps to do it. We also have things like, decorations in classrooms and signage and everything. And those are absolutely great reminders. But I feel that that's a superficial piece. We really need to get the kids interacting. And then of course, behind every child is a parent or a guardian. So we also try, in these situations where there may be a difficult dialogue about race or something, or somebody insulted someone, or somebody said a racist comment, bring in the parents, bring in the household, and try to have people have this dialogue. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Kathy. Those were really great words, particularly emphasizing the human connection and the student to student peer learning and peer sharing. So thank you all for attending the panel. We're going to close now with Neelam to say the closing remarks.
Hello. Hi, I don't think my video is on. No.
So a bit of technical difficulty.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. Thank you all very much for your time and all of your thoughts. Thank you, Cleo, for moderating, and a special thanks to the panelists for their honesty, thoughtfulness, and advocacy for world language programming. Your passion and commitment to the field is inspiring. Traditionally, language learning has been viewed as something that is technical or academic, and you have highlighted that it's so much more than that. It's dynamic, it's contextual, and in many ways, it's organic. And cultural identity, equity, and high achievement for all students are the hallmarks of global competence. And I think we have all been a bit reassured today about language education in this country. So thank you all very much. We will definitely keep this conversation going over the coming months. For our audience, please be sure to stay connected with Asia Society, as we will bring more discussion about race, identity, and culture through our Teaching Truth to Power discussion series. We look forward to seeing you all soon, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.